Sometimes it does that. Anyway, so like I said, welcome. This week there was this whole kind of unit on ethics in chapter 7, but really I think the focus of the week was this bank reconciliation and cash handling as a whole, right? That was the whole, which is where a lot of the fraud happens. And so that's why they kind of fold in this ethics discussion. There's ethics discussions all along. It doesn't have to just be cash. Waste management years ago had this issue where they just adjusted how they depreciated assets because they were adjusting depreciation, not because they found changes in how long the assets actually lasted, but they needed to increase the amount of net income to keep investors happy. So they decided dumpsters that used to be 12-year depreciation were now 18, and trucks that were 16 were now 22. And of course that reduced the amount of depreciation expense and increased the net income. But then they had a bunch of assets that were failing before they were fully depreciated, and that caused problems down the line. So there's all sorts of ethics issues in accounting. Obviously, you're dealing with money, and most of us are tempted by it. An important scriptural note is that it never says anywhere in the scriptures that money is the root of all evil, although people will quote it all the time. It does say that the love of money is the root of all evil. And to me, those are two radically different things. I think of money as a tool, and as an accountant, it's my job to help people properly manage that tool. But I can't help people who love it too much, or maybe the opposite too. You see people that are like almost so proud of being poor, like they're somehow more righteous, and you're like, well, righteousness is righteousness, and money is money, and certainly if we have unhealthy attitudes about anything in that way, it can damage our ability to be obedient to the Lord. All right, that was a lot of I was waxing philosophical or theological there. So just any points of discussion, I guess general points before I launch into a little bit on bank reconciliation. Anybody want to express their hatred for the creators of the exams? Or
I do. I hate them. I'm sorry, by the way, for the multiple emails you got. I don't know if this happened to anybody else, but my question 20 was actually 2 questions combined, and I didn't want to email you like a 25th time, but because I knew I was going to be in this, but I actually had 2 questions on my question 20, so I just kind of did both questions and then picked an answer that was in there. So if I got it wrong, I want you to look at it and say, no, she didn't, because it literally had 2 questions that even the fonts were different.
Okay.
And company names, 2 different, and I tried to screenshot it, but of course Proctorio was like, nah, you can't do
it. It's like, what do you think you're doing? Okay.
Yeah, so.
Well, I'll check that out. And like always, like if you have, in fact, if people have like specific issues like that, I want them to contact me. If it's general gripes, there's not a lot I can do about like, I hate all the tests in the whole world. Well, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
But if it's like something weird like that, let me know. I'll check into it, and because it might be affecting more people than just you. The other thing is right now is they're going to do like a total revamp of this course. I think between now and the next semester, because it's got these weird issues. And so anything where I'm saying you need to fix this, it's just going to be like, yeah, we're doing the revamp. So it's kind of up to me on an individual basis to fix those things this semester. It's an interesting thing. So I teach for ASU, Arizona State, and then a little college, and then BYUI, and they have different models. And BYUI's model is very much like a very centralized model. Like, we're going to put this course together. You don't alter it. We're going to send the same course out to everybody. And then if you have problems, you submit a fix request and we fix them across the board, which does create a nice consistent product, I suppose. But the downside is it's hard for the teacher to be very responsive to student concerns when I'm not supposed to change things. But on individual things like that, like there was a weird question that didn't, then yeah, I can certainly check into that. Anybody else have issues like that, or?
Am I the only one that was the lucky one to get to get a question with 2, like a double question? It was very weird. And I looked at it and was like, yeah, I'm gonna come back to that. I don't.
Maybe you got it right. Maybe you should have got 2 points for getting it right twice. I don't know.
Yeah.
Double question.
And by that time I was frustrated because it wouldn't let me use both monitors, as because we had discussed that and you said, yeah, there's no reason why you couldn't, because it's not like you can't see both monitors, but it wouldn't let me do it. And then I was wearing glasses, which I don't always do, and it wouldn't like recognize me. I had to take it kept like failing me, and I just got frustrated. And I think it was all like almost midnight by the time I finished the exam, and I was so over it. I was like, I'm not bugging him again. I'm just not. But yeah, that was very strange. So I mean, some of that stuff is just the proctorial nonsense, I'm told, but that question was weird.
Yeah, no, and Proctorio is frustrating in the sense that it serves a purpose, and we're finding out, we would like to believe at BYU Idaho we wouldn't have people who cheat, but guess what? People are people, right? Like, especially a class that feels high pressure,
Mhm.
like people cheat. And so having some sort of way to monitor that is important, but at the same time, the trade-off is frustration.
Stress.
We used to have to do a proctor agreement, and everybody would have to find a proctor, either like go to a paid proctoring center or go to the main campus, or and that was a nightmare too. I mean, you'd have students in Africa who there's no paid proctoring center, there's no public library in their community. And so they were getting their bishop or someone to say, I'll sign off and be the proctor, but the bishop is their dad. And so there's a conflict of interest. And like so I don't know that there's a good solution.
I mean, I'd almost rather have a person, because
Right,
at least a person would be like, oh yeah, you're wearing your glasses. That 100% makes sense. Like,
right,
yeah, like, I mean, but I mean, I get it. Like, I really got a royal lashing when I complained about it to somebody. And I was like, I get it. I do get that it has its purpose, but because it's a computer program, there's no common sense to it.
right.
So it does. And one person told me that like it literally logged her off 25 minutes into her exam. That was a 2-hour exam. And then like they wouldn't let her retake it because Proctoria showed that she had been on it for 2 hours. And it was just it's a big mess. And so
Right.
I was just like, okay, it could be worse. And I really had to like Proctorio itself actually stresses me out worse than the actual exam.
Yeah, I hear that a lot from people.
And so I really just kind of have to get a handle on it and just be like, okay, this is, and then you see your face in the corner the whole time. And I'm so afraid I'm gonna like click off the share button or something. And that makes like, and then I'm gonna, so I'm like taking all these extremes to go around it. So I'm gonna have to do some research to figure out how to like get around that stuff. But
Yeah, Sherry.
Top left corner of the Proctorio screen, you hit the little arrow and minimize the video. The video bugs the heck out of me too. So you don't have to look at yourself take an exam. That's just torture.
that's good. That's good to know. The little share square that's in the bottom, I am afraid I'm gonna, because you can like accidentally click off on that and then it'll shut down your exam. So can you hide that?
Oh,
Is there a way to move that out of the way?
I'm
Because that's
near that
where,
one yet.
yeah, because that's literally where like my calculator lives, and that's where my
Yeah.
where Excel is and all that. And I'm like, I have to do these like extreme moves around it so that I don't accidentally click on it.
You're using a mouse or a mouse pad?
I am using this bad boy.
Okay, so that's good. At least you're not using. Well, good luck.
All right.
Yeah, like I said, it's the way it is. I mean, there's nothing we can do about it, but it's more stressful to me than the actual exam.
Yeah, I think you're not alone. So anyway, so what I have up on the screen is I think can everybody see what I'm sharing? I've just got a bank statement or a picture of a bank statement. You'd be surprised how many students, especially 18 to 20-year-old students, have never actually seen a bank statement. My kids, their bank statements, they have them sent to them electronically and they never look at them. They just have their phone text them whenever they have a transaction. It gives them a new balance. That being said, part of the world is still using bank statements, and we're reconciling our books to our bank statements. So that's what we'll be talking about, I guess, in this chapter. And some of you have probably already been working on it. So I'll try to go through it quickly and stop me if you want more explanation somewhere. So features of a bank statement, again, I know most of you have probably seen these. You're going to have a balance as of the last statement, and then some sort of summary of deposits and debits, and then the balance this statement, and then some detail on those deposits and credits and debits in the account. Also, just recognize, I think we've mentioned this before, but the term debit and credit gets used in banking in a way that seems backward to those of us who do accounting, because from the bank's perspective, all deposits at the bank are liabilities. And so they increase when you deposit money in your account, that's a liability to the bank. They owe you that money back. And so a debit to the account is an increase to the bank's, a credit to the account is an increase to the bank's liability, and a debit to the account is a decrease of the bank's liability. People who work in banking, when they switch over to accounting, they have to rewire their brain. Of course, to you, your checking account or your savings account, those are assets. And so you're increasing them with a debit and decreasing with a credit. So here's the process of reconciling a bank account, which is we have our balances at the beginning of the period. We have a balance it says per books, which would mean if I'm looking at my record that I keep of my balances, I'm going to have a balance. This is how much my cash balance should be. And then the balance per bank statement is that balance that the bank statement says should be my balance. And there's going to be some difference between the two. And so I have to make these adjustments when I reconcile. So the differences are usually going to be what's called deposits in transit, which would be deposits I've made at the bank, but they haven't yet shown up on the statement. Okay. So usually deposits right near the end of the month, often, or right near the end of the period, however the bank reports, may not show up on the statement. And then outstanding checks, right? And those are checks that we've written that we've recorded in our book, but have not yet shown up on the bank statement. And those are also usually things we do near the end of the month. But and maybe if this happened to you, someone gives you a check and you set it there on your table and you think I'll deposit that, and then you forget about it for a week. I stick them in my wallet and then I forget for like a week. Depends on how hard up I am that week too. Sometimes I'm like, I'm depositing this right now. Anyway, so the adjustments to our bank statement are going to be any of these things: deposits in transit or outstanding checks. So things I've recorded in my book but are not yet showing up on the bank statement. So I'm going to add those to the bank statement balance. And then any bank error. That happens sometimes. You get a statement, it'll say that a check cleared for a certain amount. You'll check that against your record and it'll be like, that's off. And occasionally you'll find that the bank made the error. And so you would adjust for that error. Banks usually make errors because they use electronic scanners for deposits, and they rely on that. And so it's easy for them to miss the handwriting a little bit. Then we'll make adjustments to our book balance for any collections. These are items that would be on our bank statement, but that are not yet on our books. So like, for example, I sold some assets from my business this year, and the person who bought them from me, I carried the note on it, and the person who bought them from me, we just set it up through it was actually our, like the title company. They had a service where this person would just make their payments right to them, and then the title company would charge some fee, and they would put the money in my account. And so it's never on my books, right? Each month I double check. When I get my statement, I go, yep, they paid me. And then I add that to my books at that point. So the adjustment per books would be any collections that have happened on my behalf that aren't yet in my books, or any checks, or other payments that aren't in my books. A lot of times like a bank service charge or things like that. Any bounce checks, because when I get my check from my customer, I record it as an increase to my cash account. Then if the bank tries to get payment on it and it bounces, they're going to deduct that money back out of my account, right? So I'll have to do an adjustment there. And then the errors I've made. Sometimes I'll get my statement, it'll say a check cleared for this amount, and I'll say that doesn't match my book. And I'll go back and look at the check and be like, oh, I wrote it in my book wrong, right? I recorded it wrong. That happens less and less now because we're using accounting software. And so usually the same software I entered it into is also the software I printed the check from. So there's like not going to be a discrepancy between what I recorded in the book and what does anybody still handwrite checks for business accounts. That's rare now, but smaller businesses still do, right? I mean, I don't know, even QuickBooks. I mean, anyway, so that's the process we follow. Start with our bank statement, make these adjustments, add deposit in transit, subtract outstanding checks, and then adjust for bank errors. Then we start with our book balance, add any collections, subtract any bounced checks, subtract any other payments, adjust for company errors, and at that point, our balances should match. Those are our adjusted balances. So here's an example, the Laird Company, maybe they're Scottish, the Laird Company shows balance per bank, 15,900, no, too many zeros, 15,907.45 on April 30th. On this date, the balance on their books shows 11,709.45. So they have all these things they look at. They have deposits in transit, outstanding checks, other unrecorded deposits, etc. Let's see. So 2201 in deposits that they've recorded in their books but are not yet showing up on the bank statement. $5,904 in checks that they've recorded in their books but are not yet showing on the bank statement. They have an electronic receipt from a customer. So this would be something that showed up on the bank statement but not recorded in their book. Unrecorded charges, so a return check, debit and credit card fees. Man, if you're paying, oh, that must probably their processing fees. Service charges, again, those are on the statement but not yet in the book. And then they made a company error. Let's see, they wrote the check for $12.26, but they recorded it as $12.62. So they have to fix that error. So the reconciliation would look like this. They take your cash balance for the bank statement, add the deposits in transit, subtract the outstanding checks. That gives them their adjusted cash balance. Then they start with their book balance, add in that ETF they received, add in that error because it was a $36 error that showed less money in their account than there really was. Subtract out that non-sufficient fund check, subtract out the debit and credit card fees, subtract out the banking service charge. That gives them the adjusted balance per their books, and the two should match. I think this is one of those areas where I feel like sometimes people like overcomplicate it in their brain. And really the secret to it is when we're looking at our bank balance, our statement balance, the only adjustments we're making would be those things which are on our books but not yet on the bank statement. And then when we're looking at our book balance, the only adjustments we're going to make are those things which are on the statement but not yet on our book balance. That's all. It's so easy to like for me at least, I'll talk myself into these circles thinking that there's something more to it there. But that's really all there is to it. All right. Also recognize that anytime I make an adjustment to my book, I'm going to have to do a journal entry. Okay. So because that revenue that I collected from a customer or whatever it wasn't yet in my book, it showed up on my bank statement, I have to now do an entry to put it into my book. Same thing with those expenses I've paid, the service charges, things like that, I have to do an entry. So any adjustments to the book balance are going to require a journal entry. So there's the collection from the customer. There's fixing the book error. Right, the cash goes up, accounts payable goes down. The bank expenses, etc. So just recognize that if this is pretty easy once you do more of it. The thing is even in real life, you honestly usually only do it once a month. And so it's easy for the first few months you're doing it to do reconciliations to feel like it's all new again, until you've just done it enough times that you're like, okay, this process is pretty simple. Software programs like QuickBooks, they make it pretty easy. A lot of people, like my QuickBooks, I have tied into my bank account. So it will actually read the transactions in my account and match them up to the ones I enter. And then when I do reconciliation, it's kind of just like saying, here's how we've matched it up. Do you have any, did the computer make any guesses that were wrong? And you just pretty much, it does it pretty well. And so it only gets confused if you have a bunch of transactions that are, say, like all the same dollar amount. It might get that confused. So a lot of it's done by computer now. again, so much in this class is stuff that computers do for us, but that someone who's acting as an accountant may have to dig into when there's an error or something. And so we have to understand the process so that we can deal with it. But most of the work, the heavy lifting, is done by computers. All right. So that was a lot of me just talking. That's how my kids feel, I think. Just like, you can see that thing when you start in on your kids on like where you're going to teach them a life lesson, and like immediately their eyes just go to this, like, I call it like you're just waiting for this to be over. Like they're just like, they're gonna endure to the end of that moment. And and so I'm sorry if the lecture feels that way too. Any homework problems we want to look at or specific questions to take a look at? Or is this just a super easy chapter? It is an easier chapter, I think, than some.
I was going to say, I wouldn't necessarily call it an easier chapter, but it's easier to kind of get my head around. Probably because I deal with, ethical issues and what, you know what I mean? It's much more relatable.
Yeah.
The first half of this class has been, it's not something I do in my daily life in terms of much more the vocabulary and the vernacular of accounting, and then how to plug all of that in appropriately to, I'm still struggling with that a bit, just with the nomenclature side of it.
Yeah.
The math part, not so difficult. It's just, knowing where to align everything. And
yeah, that's what I've always said, that the hard thing about accounting is not the math, it's I call it the classification, the putting things into the right area and understanding why it fits there.
Right.
Takes time, honestly, just working with it. That's how everything is in life, right? Like, it's funny, I'll have students that'll be like, I'll never be able to learn this. I'm like, you could play guitar. Like, like, do you remember when you first started playing guitar? It was hard. But anything is like that. Anyway, again, so, I mean, if we don't have any specific questions you want to take a look at, that's okay too. I mean, we don't have to.
Yeah, I didn't have anything so far.
Okay, anyone else?
Mm-mm.
Okay,
Not so far.
well, that was a quick one. So anything else to talk about, or can we be happy to only have 30 minutes, 5 of which was spent with Michelle and I talking about ethical dilemmas or ethical, I don't know, cash handling procedures.
Yeah, real life accounting.
Geraldine, I
I was
saw
just
your
thinking-
camera come on. Okay, there you are.
I was just thinking when you were talking to Michelle earlier, my husband worked for retail he still is in retail, but he's on the transportation side. But when he was working in one of the stores, they had a policy that you couldn't make the deposit in the morning until the next person had come there. But he was the manager of the store and he wanted that money out of the store before the store opened. So he did that. And one of those mornings, he had a gentleman come in and he walked up and with his purchase, and my husband went to take it from him, and the guy kind of pulled it back, and he's like, okay, I guess he hasn't decided if he wants to purchase it or not. Well, the guy flipped open the box and pulled out a gun on him, and I said, I want everything that's in your safe, or that you have access to. So he only got just a little bit of money because my husband had already made the drop. Well, he got in trouble. Not thanks for saving us $3,000. You shouldn't have done that. So I thought, well, that's kind of a, you saved us this money, but you shouldn't have done it. You shouldn't have dropped it yet. So anyways, he came home from work, and
they wouldn't have known he dropped it early if he hadn't gotten robbed, huh?
Yeah, and he came home early from work, and I'm like, what are you doing home? And he was, I got robbed. I'm like, okay, so why are you home? Because when I was growing up, my dad, several times his restaurant got robbed, and somebody robbed us, but it was going in while nobody was there, right? So that's what I'm thinking in my head. Well, okay. And so he's like, no, my boss sent me home. Well, then he tells me, yeah, the guy had a nickel plated da-da-da-da-da. And I was like, seriously, you were interested more in the gun than...
Yeah, it was a
Anyways,
nice gun.
Yeah, he had a lady at the back of the store that was there with a little girl when it all went down. And then she came up and said, "I'd like to pay for these." And he's like, "Okay, well, I hope you're writing a check or paying with a card because I don't have any cash."
Do you have exact change?
So anyway,
No, you know,
apparently
but
that guy robbed several stores because apparently he knew that deposits were not made. So he
Right.
robbed several of that same retailer that morning.
Right.
And so anyways.
No,
Retailers are so funny in that way. Like, they're just so funny in that way. They're so concerned about policy and procedure that they forget,
Right.
like, they forget the good thing that
the
happened,
common sense. Yeah.
Right.
the common sense thing. A friend of mine stopped a shoplifter and they were like, "Oh, you shouldn't have done that." They were more concerned with the fact that she could have gotten hurt and then sued them rather than like the $1,000 whatever that she was like, but they didn't get away with this
Right.
thing.
But you know, so
That
even the church, you know, we can't deposit tithing until it's been processed, and then you have to have two people there to process it. And you know, and I've had a tithing settlement every year. People will come in and I have a guy who pays for the whole year, so he'll give you like $8,000, and he does it in cash. So it's like this big. If he has like this tithing envelope stuffed with $100 bills, and he'll hand it to me, and I don't have a clerk there, so I can't process it. And so, you know, I stick it in my coat pocket, and then it goes home and it sits in my coat pocket until Sunday when we can process it, even though this guy was in on, say, a Tuesday night. And I've always thought, that's not, I mean, honestly, probably what I should do is call the clerk and say, "Hey, come down, let's process," because it's in cash, right? That's a big wad of cash
Right.
that I don't feel comfortable having. The other side is the kids who bring you like $4 of change in an envelope, and it weighs you down the whole Sunday. But then you're just grateful that they're there. But you know, so the church is the same way. There's like this pretty strict policy about you have to have two people anytime you handle cash, but you don't have to have two people when someone hands the tithing to the bishop or a member of the bishopric. But I have people who will drop tithing by my house, and like hand it to my wife, and she's like, "I can't really take this," and they're like, "Oh, that's fine." And she's like, "No, really, I don't want to take it." And they're like, "No, yeah, it'll be great." And they just like leave it there with her, and there'll be this envelope sitting on my kitchen table when I get home from work at night, and I'm thinking, this isn't, you know, I have teenage kids. I would hate for one of them to make a poor decision and, you know, grab that or something. I mean, that they never
Yeah,
have. So that's
we
good.
had that when my husband was bishop too. He just people just don't think sometimes.
Well, they're not
You
thinking
know,
in
and we would
terms of
have
like
people
cash
call the
habits,
house and say, "Can I talk to the bishop?" And I'm like, "He has a full-time job. He's
right?
not home
And
during the day."
yeah, well, you don't think of the bishop in terms of a human being. You think of him in terms of he's the bishop. And now, I've never had a bishop in my family. My dad's not a member of the church, and my husband just recently, in the last few years, got rebaptized into the church. So I've never had one in my house. But I'm friends with my husband's best friends with our bishop now, and so I'm getting a new perspective on life as a bishop
the
and
human side of it,
the human side of it. And because our last bishop before him, he was so young that I taught him in Sunday school.
right?
And so it took me like a full year to be able to remember to call him Bishop and not Andrew.
People
And I'd be like,
expect you to be
"Andrew Ray
wise,
Bishop."
but you just feel like you're you. So then you're like, okay.
And I would completely forget that, oh yeah, you are actually bishop. I mean, he was an excellent bishop and very serious, but every time I looked at him, I saw the kid in my Sunday school class or my primary class.
Wait, you have to be very serious to be an excellent bishop.
Oh no,
Oh, okay.
that's just who he was as a person, a serious.
It's just anyway. All right. Well, clearly, I think we don't have any questions about accounting. It was really nice to visit about other things, but I also don't want to make people who feel like they have to stay and listen to us chat either. So we can, I guess, wrap the meeting up. And of course, if we want to talk, I don't mind staying and talking. But I also want to let people go if they need to. Anybody willing to offer us a closing prayer to the meeting?
Yeah, I will.
Great, thanks.
Our Father in heaven, as we humbly bow our heads before thee this morning, we thank you for the opportunity to meet together as a class today, and for Brother Fox taking the time to assist us and walk us through some of the assignment and content for this week. Please help us to continue to stay strong and focused upon our academic studies and in all aspects of our lives, and guide us by thy Spirit in all things. And we ask these things in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, thank you everybody for taking the time to be here and
Well, thanks for all you do to
hang in there.
help us be successful.
Thank
Okay.
you, definitely.
I've got a solid 75.6 in the class that I'm clinging to like a dream. So
What's tough about this class is a lot of people who are accustomed to getting good grades will get like their first C in this class, and if it were just because the content was hard, then that's how it is, but sometimes when it's these structural things, like Michelle's frustrations with Proctorio, or other people have frustrations with how the exam feels so different than the assignment material, even though it's the same concepts, but the feel is very different.
Mhm.
I get the frustration, and that was actually they were asking us about the revamp of the course, and that was my feedback is honestly just make the exam look and feel more like the assignment material.
Yeah.
It's not hard to do when you have something like Wiley, or I use my lab at EAC, where in essence I can just take a homework style problem and change the settings on it to be an exam type problem, and you're doing the same type of work. So my chapter 1 through 4 exam is honestly people given a bunch of transactions. They have to take those transactions and journalize them, and then put them in T accounts and find balances and create a trial balance, and then do adjusting entries and have an adjusted trial balance, and then doing an income statement, a balance sheet, and a statement of retained earnings, and then doing closing entries. That's a big
Yeah, I can
brutal.
do that.
It's a big brutal exam, but I think it gets to the heart of the skills we want them to have, and the knowledge.
Yeah.
In essence, what you're doing is you're doing multiple choice questions that take you through that process, but it feels more disjointed, and it doesn't feel like it. And so that's my hope, is as they adjust the course, they'll.
Well, and some
Having a
people
bunch
do
of
different
word
better.
problems.
I would do better if I just had to fill out the statements, like you said, and do those things. But when
Mhm.
you give me word problems, even in high school, those word problems those are not my thing.
Well,
I don't know if they ever will be.
You
Yeah,
see me rubbing the twitch in my left eye as
Yeah.
as Brother Fox just walked through all of that. My eye started.
Yeah. Yeah.
I always tell people, like, accounting is easier in real life than it is in a canned book scenario, because I know what I'm doing in real life. Like, revenue makes sense when I've been there collecting the cash from people.
Right.
Or when I've
Yeah.
said to people, you can pay me in 30 days, accounts receivable makes sense to me because I know what it means. It means the guy bought something from me, but I gave him a month to pay me. But when it's all in a big word problem, it's like it feels like it occupies a lot more brain space to deal with. First, I've got to interpret what the problem means, and then anyway, so
And then
yeah.
when they throw those tricky questions in, like they're
Mhm.
they're in there trying to trick you, like, oh, I didn't even need that half of the information.
Right.
Like, really, I only need 3 things.
But I
but
will
they
say
give you
that's
10 things.
that's the complaint of accounting students the world over. It's not just here, it's everywhere, because it's just like, I hate word problems, and all this is a massive word problem course where it's not the math that's hard, like Robert was saying. It's instead,
Right.
how do I classify these things, or how do I organize these things?
Pull it apart and
Yeah.
put it where
Although,
it's supposed to be.
yeah. All right. Well,
Oh, I did have one more
okay.
question. I noticed in the announcement that you said that the paper is due this week, but it says in the module that it's not due till next week. So it's not due till next week, right?
Yeah, I responded to somebody posted in there and said, isn't it due next week? And I responded and said, yeah, my mistake.
Oh,
So
thank
that was
heaven.
just an error on my part.
Okay.
Yeah, it used to be. And
What,
so
you're human?
well, honestly, I'll go on those announcements that has all the things listed out, and I'll copy and paste them from the last semester, and then just adjust dates or things as I need to. And I just missed the fact that
Somebody moved it. I
yeah,
saw, because it was originally due this week, and then somebody moved it, and then I saw that you had posted that, and I was like, oh no, did they move it back?
it was one of those course fixes where we said, why do we have this additional discussion plus the homework plus this paper all due at the same week? Like, why don't we just make the paper due a week later or whatever. And so
Yeah.
someone said, yeah, it seems like a good idea, and adjusted the course. Anyway. All right. Well, have a great day. Thank you. Oh, wait, somebody
You too. Thanks again for everything.
here.
And
Okay.
thank you.
All right. Thanks. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye.